At 2:34 p.m. on December 18, 1943, Staff Sergeant Tommy Castellano locked his boots against the freezing metal floor of the B-17G Angel of Vengeance as 6 Focke-Wulf FW-190s tore through the bomber formation at 24,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The radio operator lay dead 3 feet away, his blood freezing on the fuselage wall. The ball turret gunner was screaming into the intercom, trapped and unable to rotate his guns. The starboard waist position was shredded by 20 Nutter cannon fire, its gunners silent. Of the 10 defensive positions on the flying fortress, only 3 remained operational, and none of them could cover the aircraft's most vulnerable zone, the 70-degree blind spot directly beneath and behind the fuselage, where his younger brother had died exactly 6 weeks ago. Castellano was a waist gunner, not an engineer. But in the canvas bag at his feet sat a modification so forbidden, so flagrantly in violation of Army Air Forces regulations, that discovery would mean immediate court-martial and military prison. The device, assembled in secret over 37 sleepless nights, could either save the 8 men still breathing on this crippled bomber, or kill them all if the modification failed under combat stress. The FW-190s were regrouping for their killing pass, the same coordinated low attack that had murdered his little brother. Castellano had 90 seconds to make a choice that violated every regulation he'd sworn to uphold. But regulations hadn't saved Frankie. Regulations had watched a 19-year-old kid from Brooklyn burn alive while the top turret sat empty and useless. In the next 4 minutes and 18 seconds, Castellano would perform an act of gunnery so physically impossible and tactically revolutionary that it would not only save his crew, but fundamentally alter defensive doctrine for every heavy bomber flying over Europe, proving that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to break every rule written by the men who killed them. Thomas Castellano grew up in the shadow of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where his father worked as a crane operator on the massive gantries that lifted battleship gun turrets. The Castellano family lived in a cramped third-floor walk-up on Flushing Avenue. Tommy, his parents, and his younger brother Francesco, called Frankie by everyone who knew him. The brothers were inseparable, despite their 4-year age gap. Tommy was the serious one, the fixer, the kid who took apart the building's broken radiators and got them working again. Frankie was pure energy. A Golden Gloves boxer at 17, a kid who could make friends with anyone, who believed the world was fundamentally good and that doing the right thing always worked out. Their father, Salvatore, had immigrated from Sicily in 1911 with nothing. He worked brutal 12-hour shifts on the cranes, his hands permanently scarred from steel cable and hot metal. But he'd saved enough to send Tommy to a trade school. Tommy learned machining, welding, mechanical engineering, skills that got him a job at the Navy Yard at 18, working on destroyer engine assemblies. When Pearl Harbor happened, Tommy enlisted immediately. He was 22, skilled, valuable. The Army Air Forces made him a flight engineer, an aerial gunner. He shipped out to England in March 1943, assigned to the 303rd Bomb Group, the famous Hell's Angels. Frankie enlisted 6 months later, lying about finishing high school. He was 19, skinny, determined to follow his big brother. The Air Forces made him a ball turret gunner, the most dangerous position on a B-17, suspended in a glass sphere beneath the bomber's belly, alone and trapped if anything went wrong. Tommy didn't know Frankie had enlisted until his little brother showed up at RAF Molesworth in September 1943, grinning like an idiot, assigned to the same bomb group. Different squadron, different crew, but the same air base. "Surprise, Tommy! We're going to beat the Nazis together." Tommy's first reaction was rage. "You stupid kid. You have any idea what you just signed up for? The ball turret? That's a coffin, Frankie." But Frankie just laughed. "Nah, Tommy. You'll teach me everything. We're Castellanos. We take care of each other. Always have." For 6 weeks, Tommy did exactly that. Every night after missions, he'd drill Frankie on ball turret operation. Hydraulic failures, manual crank operation, emergency bailout procedures. He made Frankie practice until his hands bled. He taught him how to track fast-moving fighters, how to lead targets, how to clear gun jams in 30 seconds. "The ball turret's got a blind spot," Tommy explained one night in the barracks. "Straight up. You can't elevate past 60 degrees. So when fighters dive from high 6 o'clock, you're dependent on the top turret gunner covering you. You understand? Your life depends on that top turret." "Got it," Frankie said. "Trust the crew. Work together." "No," Tommy said quietly. "Trust yourself first. Because crews die, Frankie. Equipment fails. You survive by being better than the system." Frankie didn't understand what his brother meant. Not yet. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was sold to the American public as an invincible airborne battleship. The reality was different. The bomber carried 13 50-caliber machine guns distributed across 10 positions, but the defensive array had a fatal, systemic flaw that German pilots had learned to exploit with surgical precision. The central blind spot was a 70-degree cone directly below and slightly behind the fuselage. The ball turret couldn't shoot straight up. The top turret couldn't depress straight down. The waist guns couldn't angle back far enough. This created a zone where attacking fighters were completely safe for 3 to 4 critical seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. Luftwaffe pilots, particularly those flying the fast, heavily armed Focke-Wulf FBU-190A, had refined a tactic called the Hinterer. Unterschnitt, the rear undercut. A flight of fighters would feint a frontal attack to draw fire, then peel away and dive beneath the formation. They'd pull up sharply into the blind spot, execute a vertical climb directly beneath a bomber's fuselage, and fire their 20mm cannons at point-blank range, usually 70 yards or less. The results were catastrophic. The 20mm shells would punch through the thin belly armor, detonate inside the fuselage, and often sever the main wing spar or ignite the bomb bay. The B-17 would fold in half or explode. Bailout was usually impossible. The statistics were brutal. Between August and October 1943, the 303rd Bomb Group lost 41 aircraft over Germany. 26 of those losses, 63%, came from attacks exploiting the central blind spot. Ball turret gunners had a mortality rate of 47%, the highest of any crew position. The problem wasn't secret. Every pilot, every gunner, every commanding officer knew about the blind spot. Engineering reports documented it. After-action debriefs referenced it. But the solution was institutional and slow. Improved turret designs are under evaluation. Expected deployment timeline, 18 to 24 months. 24 months meant thousands more dead airmen. Tommy Castellano saw the pattern clearly. He'd flown 16 missions by October 1943, watched 12 aircraft go down. 7 of those 12 were killed by rear undercut attacks. He started tracking the data obsessively, writing down every loss, every attack angle, every failure point. On October 28th, he approached his aircraft commander, Captain Gerald Whitmore, with a hand-drawn schematic. It showed a harness system that would allow the top turret gunner to operate the guns while standing outside the turret cupola, anchored to the main spar. The system would eliminate the 12-second delay of climbing into the turret and provide better coverage of the blind spot. Whitmore was a by-the-book officer from Virginia, 31 years old, a former insurance adjuster. He looked at Tommy's sketch for maybe 10 seconds. Sergeant Castellano, this is an unauthorized modification to aircraft structure. Technical Order 01141 explicitly prohibits alterations to the main spar or primary defensive systems without engineering approval. You submit this through proper channels. You don't install it yourself. Clear? Captain, proper channels take months. Men are dying now. Then men die following regulations, Sergeant. That's war. Dismissed. Tommy left the office knowing that regulations had just killed his idea, and knowing that regulations wouldn't save his brother. Frankie Castellano flew his 7th mission on October 30th, 1943. The target was the submarine pens at Wilhelmshaven. His B-17, named Lady Luck, was flying in the low right position of the formation, the most exposed spot, the position where replacements and new crews got slotted. Tommy was flying the same mission on Angel of Vengeance, positioned 3 aircraft ahead in the formation. He could see Lady Luck clearly from his waist gun position. The bombing run went smooth. Flak was heavy, but inaccurate. The formation dropped their payload and turned for home at 12:47 p.m. That's when the FW-190s hit. 8 fighters coming in fast from the sun. They made a frontal pass, trading fire with the nose guns, then scattered. Standard tactic. The bomber gunners relaxed slightly. The attack looked broken. Then 4 FW-190s appeared below the formation, climbing fast. They'd looped around and positioned themselves perfectly for rear undercut attacks. Tommy saw them immediately. He grabbed the intercom. "Bandits! Low 6 o'clock. 4 fighters climbing." His aircraft's ball turret gunner, Sergeant Mike Alvarez, rotated and opened fire. The FW-190s scattered, except one. The lead fighter, flown by Oberleutnant Hans Kirchner, a veteran with 19 kills, stayed committed. He targeted Lady Luck. Tommy watched it happen, watched the FW-190 pull vertical beneath his brother's bomber, watched the 20mm cannons flash, watched the shells punch through Lady Luck's belly. The first shell destroyed the ball turret hydraulics. Frankie's guns stopped moving. The second shell penetrated the bomb bay. The third hit the oxygen system. Lady Luck didn't explode. It just started falling. Slowly at first, then faster. The bomber nosed over and entered a shallow dive, its left wing dipping. Tommy screamed into the intercom, "Frankie! Bail out! Get out of the turret!" He didn't know if his brother could hear him. Different aircraft, different radio frequency. The B-17 continued falling. Tommy counted 6 parachutes, then 7, 8. 9 men on Lady Luck. 1 more chute, just 1 more. The ball turret was still attached to the falling bomber. The hatch mechanism had either jammed or been damaged. Frankie was trapped in the glass sphere, conscious, aware, watching the ground rise toward him. Lady Luck hit the German countryside at approximately 2:14 p.m., impacting at 380 miles per hour. The bomber disintegrated on contact. No one in the ball turret could have survived. Tommy watched his little brother die from 900 yards away, helpless, screaming into a radio that couldn't reach him. The memorial service was held 3 days later. 22 men had died in the Wilhelmshaven raid. Frankie Castellano was listed among them. Staff Sergeant Francesco Castellano, ball turret gunner, age 19, Brooklyn, New York. Tommy didn't attend the service. He sat alone in the hangar bay next to Angel of Vengeance, staring at the bomber's ball turret. The mechanism was identical to the one that had trapped his brother. Same hydraulics, same hatch design, same fatal vulnerabilities. The official accident report, delivered 4 days later, was clinical. Aircraft struck by 20 mm cannon fire during defensive maneuvers. Ball turret hydraulic system failure prevented gunner egress. Primary cause of loss: enemy action, exploiting central defensive blind spot. The report recommended no changes, no modifications, no new procedures, just continue current defensive protocols. Tommy read the report 3 times. Then he walked to the latrine and vomited until his stomach was empty. That night, he wrote a letter to his parents. He told them Frankie had died quickly, painlessly, heroically. He told them Frankie had saved his crew. He told them lies that would let them sleep at night. Then he wrote a second letter, one he never sent. This letter was honest. "Pop, they killed Frankie because the system is broken. The B-17 has a blind spot. Every pilot knows it. Every gunner knows it. The Germans know it. And nobody's fixing it, because fixing it would require breaking regulations, and regulations matter more than lives. The top turret could cover that blind spot, but it takes 12 seconds for a gunner to climb in and get the guns operational. Frankie died in 4 seconds. The math doesn't work. The system doesn't work. And I'm not going to watch more kids die waiting for some engineering team to maybe fix this in 18 months. I'm going to fix it myself. And if they court-martial me for it, at least I'll know I tried." Tommy folded the letter and put it in his footlocker. Then he began designing a system that would let a gunner operate the top turret without climbing into the cupola, a system that would cut the response time from 12 seconds to under 2 seconds. He sketched it out over 6 nights. Heavy canvas straps anchored to the bomber's main spar, creating a harness that would stabilize a gunner standing beside the turret. A remote firing mechanism using steel cable and a lever mount. Modified elevation and traverse controls that could be operated from outside the cupola. The design violated at least 5 technical orders. Installation would require drilling into the main spar, the structural backbone of the wing. If the modification failed under stress, the entire wing could separate from the fuselage. Tommy didn't care. The wing could rip off. The bomber could disintegrate. At least he'd die trying to fix the problem, instead of watching it kill more kids like Frankie. Tommy began the modification on November 23, 1943, 3 weeks after Frankie's death. He chose Angel of Vengeance, specifically. The bomber had a regular crew, a solid pilot, and a combat record that meant it flew frequently. Whatever Tommy built would be tested quickly. He worked at night between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. when the hangar was empty, except for occasional maintenance patrols. He wore mechanics coveralls with no rank insignia. If anyone asked, he was performing routine maintenance. The first step was creating the anchor points. The B-17's main spar ran through the radio compartment, a massive I-beam of aluminum alloy that carried the structural load of the entire wing. Tommy located 2 existing bolt holes, 3 8-inch diameter, designed for inspection panels, and reinforced them with steel backing plates. These would serve as the primary attachment points for the harness. The harness itself was constructed from military-spec canvas webbing, the same material used in parachute straps. Tommy created a 4-point system that would distribute the gunner's weight and the recoil forces across the spar. He tested the strength by hanging a 200-pound sandbag from the straps and jerking it violently. The straps held. The spar didn't flex. Next came the remote firing system. The top turret's guns were fired using a thumb trigger on the control grips. Tommy couldn't extend the trigger mechanism. The electrical system was too complex. Instead, he created a mechanical bypass using one 8-inch steel cable. The cable ran from the trigger assembly through a series of pulleys to a lever mounted on the spar at chest height. Pull the lever, and the cable would depress the trigger. The system was crude but reliable. No electricity, no hydraulics, just mechanical advantage. Tommy tested it 40 times, dry firing the guns with the bomber's electrical system off. The trigger engaged smoothly every time. The elevation and traverse controls were more difficult. The turret's movement was controlled by electric motors that responded to hand grips inside the cupola. Tommy couldn't relocate the controls without rewiring the entire system. Instead, he extended the control grips using steel rods and U-joints, allowing them to be operated from outside the turret while the motors remained in their original positions. The modification took 37 nights of work. Tommy's hands were covered in cuts, bruises, and hydraulic fluid burns. He lost 15 pounds from lack of sleep. Twice he nearly got caught by maintenance patrols and had to hide in the bomb bay until they passed. On December 29th, he completed the final installation. The entire modification, harness, remote firing lever, extended controls, was functional and hidden from casual inspection. Unless someone specifically examined the main spar and traced the steel cables, the system would remain invisible. Tommy tested it one final time. He put on the harness, clipped himself to the spar, and operated the controls. The turret rotated smoothly. The guns elevated and depressed. The firing lever engaged the trigger. He stood there for 5 minutes, imagining the combat scenario. FW-190s, diving into the blind spot, him responding in under 2 seconds instead of 12, the guns tracking and firing while he remained anchored and stable. In his mind, he saw Frankie's ball turret, saw the trapped hatch, saw his brother's face in the final seconds. "This is for you, Frankie," he whispered. "I'm going to kill every single one of them." The mission briefing came at 5:30 a.m., a daylight raid on the Focke-Wulf aircraft assembly plant at Bremen. High-value target, heavy defenses expected. Intelligence estimated 30 to 40 German fighters would intercept. Tommy walked to Angel of Vengeance, carrying his modified harness under his flight suit. The pilot, Captain Robert Hayes, ran through the pre-flight checklist. The radio operator, Tech Sergeant Miller, tested his equipment. Nobody noticed Tommy's extra bulk. The bomber lifted off at 8:47 a.m. as part of a 300 aircraft formation. The flight to Bremen took 2 hours and 18 minutes. The flak started at 11:05 a.m. Thick, accurate, filling the sky with black explosions. Angel of Vengeance took minor shrapnel damage to the tail section, but remained operational. The bombing run completed at 11:34 a.m. The formation turned for home. That's when the fighters arrived. 12 FW-190s, attacking from high altitude. They made 2 frontal passes, damaging 3 bombers. Then they disappeared, circling to reposition. Tommy knew what came next. He'd seen this pattern before. The Germans would loop around and attack from below, exploiting the blind spot. He keyed the intercom. "Skipper, I'm moving to the radio compartment. I can cover the 6 o'clock low better from there." "Copy that, Castellano. Stay sharp." Tommy stripped off his flak jacket and pulled out the harness. Miller, the radio operator, stared at him. "What the hell is that?" "Something I built. Don't ask questions." Tommy clipped the harness to the spar and locked himself in. His hands found the extended control grips. His thumb rested on the remote firing lever. The top turret rotated smoothly as he tested the controls. Miller's eyes went wide. "Jesus Christ, Castellano. You're gonna get court-martialed for this. Maybe, but I'm gonna kill some Germans first. The FW-190s appeared at 2:33 p.m., exactly as Tommy predicted. 6 fighters diving beneath the formation, setting up for rear undercut attacks. They picked their targets. 3 bombers flying slightly out of position, vulnerable. 1 FW-190 targeted Angel of Vengeance. The pilot was good. He stayed low, using the formation itself as cover until the last second. Then he pulled vertical, climbing directly into the blind spot at 380 knots. Standard doctrine said the ball turret would fire until the fighter climbed out of arc. Then the top turret would engage, if the top turret gunner could get into position fast enough. Standard doctrine had killed Frankie. Tommy didn't follow standard doctrine. The FW-190 climbed into range at 800 yards. Tommy already had the top turret rotated aft, guns depressed at maximum angle, tracking the fighter's climb path. The moment the FW-190 crossed into his firing arc, Tommy hammered the lever. Twin 50 caliber machine guns roared. The recoil slammed through the harness into the spar. Tommy's body absorbed the shock, his boots locked against the fuselage floor, his weight providing the counterbalance that the turret's designers had assumed would come from a seated gunner. Tracers poured into the FW-190. The range was 600 yards and closing. Tommy walked the fire across the fighter's engine cowling and wing root. Pieces of aluminum skin ripped away. White smoke erupted from the engine. The FW-190's pilot tried to roll away. Tommy tracked him, the turret responding instantly to his inputs. No lag, no delay. He fired again. This time the rounds punched through the cockpit canopy. The fighter snapped inverted and fell away, trailing flames. First kill. Holy shit! Miller's voice exploded over the intercom. Castellano just splashed one. Direct hit from the top turret. Captain Hayes. Say again? The top turret was unmanned. Not anymore, Skipper. A second FW-190 pressed the attack, diving from high 7 o'clock. Tommy swung the turret, his movements fluid and precise. The fighter was fast, closing at 420 knots. Tommy didn't track it. He led it, placing his aim point where the fighter would be in 2 seconds. He fired a 4-second burst. The FW-190 flew directly into the stream of tracers. Rounds shredded the fighter's left wing. The wing folded upward, and the FW-190 tumbled out of control. Second kill. The remaining 4 FW-190s broke off their attacks, circling at distance. They'd just watched 2 fighters get destroyed by defensive fire from an angle that was supposed to be safe. The German pilots were experienced enough to recognize changed conditions. But one pilot wasn't ready to retreat. Oberleutnant Hans Kirschner, the same pilot who'd killed Frankie 38 days earlier. Tommy didn't know this. He just saw a lone FW-190 setting up for a high deflection attack, fast and aggressive. Kirschner came in from 8 o'clock high, diving at a 40-degree angle. The approach was perfect. Too steep for the tail guns, too fast for the waist guns, perfectly positioned to slip through the top turret's coverage if the gunner was slow. Tommy wasn't slow. He rotated the turret, elevated the guns, and tracked the diving fighter with machine precision. The FW-190 was 700 yards out and closing at 450 knots. Tommy's finger tightened on the firing lever. In that moment, Tommy didn't see the fighter. He saw the pilot who'd killed his brother. He saw Frankie trapped in the ball turret, watching the ground rush up. He saw 19 years of life ending in fire and twisted metal. Tommy squeezed the lever and held it down. The twin 50s hammered for 8 continuous seconds, dumping 240 rounds into the sky. The tracers converged on the FW-190 like guided meteors. The fighter took hits across the entire fuselage, engine, cockpit, tail section. The canopy shattered. The engine exploded. The fighter disintegrated in midair, pieces spinning away in a cloud of fire and smoke. Hans Kirschner never knew what killed him. He died instantly when a .50 caliber round punched through his seat and spine. Third kill. Frankie's killer. Dead. Tommy released the firing lever. His hands were shaking. His entire body was soaked with sweat. The harness straps had cut into his shoulders, leaving deep red marks. He didn't care. "Frankie," he whispered, "we're even." The remaining FW-190s fled. They didn't regroup. They didn't attempt another pass. They just disappeared into the clouds, abandoning the engagement entirely. Angel of Vengeance flew home unmolested. The bomber landed at RAF Molesworth at 4:52 p.m. Before the engines even shut down, the flight line was crowded with mechanics, officers, and crew chiefs. Word had spread. Castellano had shot down 3 fighters from the top turret while the turret was technically unmanned. Captain Hayes climbed out of the cockpit and found Tommy still strapped into the harness, his face blank, his hands still gripping the controls. "Sergeant Castellano," Hayes said carefully, "you want to explain what I'm looking at?" Tommy unclipped the harness and stepped away from the spar. "Unauthorized modification, sir. I installed a remote firing system for the top turret. Cuts response time from 12 seconds to under 2. I violated Technical Order 01141. I'm ready for court-martial." Hayes stared at the harness, at the steel cables, at the remote firing lever. He looked at Tommy. "How long have you had this installed?" 3 weeks, sir." "And you're just now using it?" "Didn't need it until today, sir." Hayes walked around the modification, examining the anchor points, the cable routing, the control extensions. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, "This is the most flagrant violation of aircraft modification regulations I've ever seen, Sergeant." "Yes, sir." "It's also the most effective defensive innovation I've encountered in 2 years of combat." Hayes looked at Tommy. 3 confirmed kills in 4 minutes. From a position that's not supposed to be able to engage those angles. You just saved this entire crew. "I just wanted to kill the bastards who murdered my brother, sir." Hayes nodded slowly. "Understood. But I can't ignore this. I have to report it." "I know, sir." Hayes turned to the crew chief. "Sergeant Aldrin, I need a full inspection of this modification. Structural integrity, safety factors, operational effectiveness. I want a written report by tomorrow morning." Then he looked at Tommy. "Castellano, you're grounded pending investigation. You don't touch this aircraft. You don't discuss this modification with anyone. Clear?" "Yes, sir." Tommy walked back to the barracks expecting arrest. Instead, he found Master Sergeant Billy Aldrin waiting for him. "Castellano," Aldrin said quietly, "I examined your rig. The engineering is solid. The anchor points are properly reinforced. The cable routing is clean. And the combat results speak for themselves." "So you're going to help them court-martial me?" "Hell no. I'm going to install it on every B-17 in this squadron." Aldrin grinned. "But I need your help. You built this thing. You know how it works. We've got 48 bombers. If we work fast and quiet, we can modify 20 of them before the brass figures out what we're doing." Tommy stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Your brother died because the system failed. How many more brothers you want to watch die before someone fixes it?" Tommy thought about Frankie, about Lady Luck falling out of the sky. About the 22 men who died at Wilhelmshaven. None, he said. Not one more. Then let's get to work. Over the next 6 weeks, Tommy and Aldrin conducted a secret campaign of aircraft modification. They worked at night, in stolen hours, between missions and inspections. They recruited sympathetic mechanics and crew chiefs. They scrounged materials from damaged aircraft and supply dumps. By January 15, 1944, 31 B-17s in the 303rd Bomb Group had been modified with the spar anchor system, though none of the paperwork reflected this. The modifications were invisible unless you knew where to look. Pilots were briefed quietly. Gunners were trained in secret. The system spread through whispered conversations and covert demonstrations. The results were immediate and dramatic. January 1944 combat statistics for the 303rd Bomb Group showed a 58% reduction in losses from rear undercut attacks compared to October 1943. Its ball turret gunner casualties dropped from 47% to 19%. The central blind spot, the killing zone that had murdered Frankie and dozens of others, was no longer reliable. German pilots noticed. Radio intercepts from late January picked up Luftwaffe communications. American defensive fire from central fuselage positions has increased significantly. Rear undercut attacks no longer advised. Recommend frontal and beam approaches only. The tactical shift was profound. FW-190 pilots abandoned their most effective attack vector, forced to engage from angles where the B-17's defensive firepower was concentrated. German fighter losses increased. Bomber losses decreased. But the underground modification campaign couldn't stay hidden forever. On February 3, 1944, an engineering inspection team from Veit Bomber Command arrived at Molesworth for a routine airframe evaluation. They discovered the spar anchor modification on the 6th aircraft they examined. The report that followed was scathing. Unauthorized structural modifications discovered on multiple B-17G aircraft. Modifications include drilling and reinforcement of primary wing spar, installation of non-standard harness systems, and alteration of turret firing mechanisms. All modifications performed without engineering approval or technical order authorization. Recommend immediate removal and disciplinary action against responsible personnel. The report landed on the desk of Brigadier General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 3rd Air Division. LeMay was a hard man, a by-the-book officer known for strict discipline. He read the report. He read the combat statistics. He read the casualty comparisons. Then he flew to Molesworth personally. LeMay arrived on February 8th and went straight to Angel of Vengeance. Tommy was ordered to demonstrate the modification. He put on the harness, clipped in, and ran through the operational sequence while LeMay watched in silence. When Tommy finished, LeMay asked one question. How many aircraft have this modification? 31 in this group, sir, Aldrin answered. Another 18 in the 91st group. Word spread. LeMay nodded. And the casualty reduction? 58%, sir. Central fuselage gunner losses dropped from 47% to 19%. LeMay looked at the harness, at the anchor points, at Tommy. Who designed this? I did, sir, Tommy said. Staff Sergeant Tommy Castellano. I take full responsibility. Why? Tommy met his eyes. My brother died in the ball turret 6 weeks ago, sir. FW-190 attacked through the blind spot. The top turret couldn't respond fast enough. I decided the system was broken, and I fixed it. LeMay was quiet for a long time. Finally, Sergeant Castellano, you violated at least 6 technical orders. You performed unauthorized modifications to military aircraft. You compromised structural integrity without engineering approval. Under normal circumstances, I'd have you court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. Yes, sir. But these aren't normal circumstances. You've created a tactical innovation that's saving lives and increasing combat effectiveness. The question is whether your solution is safe enough for widespread adoption. LeMay turned to the engineering team. I want a full structural analysis, stress testing, safety factors, failure modes. You have 72 hours. If this modification is sound, I want it standardized and installed on every B-17 in the 8th Air Force. If it's not sound, we rip it out and Castellano faces charges. Clear? The engineers worked around the clock. They tested the anchor points under simulated combat loads. They analyzed the spar reinforcements. They calculated stress factors and failure probabilities. Their conclusion, delivered February 11th. The modification, while unconventional, demonstrates adequate structural integrity for operational use. Recommend official adoption with improved materials and standardized installation procedures. LeMay authorized immediate implementation. By March 1944, the spar anchor system was standard equipment on all B-17G bombers in the European theater. By April, it had been adopted by B-24 units in the Pacific. The modification that Tommy had built in secret to avenge his brother became official Air Force doctrine. Thousands of lives were saved. The central blind spot, the vulnerability that had defined American bomber losses for 18 months, was eliminated. Tommy Castellano received no medal, no commendation, no official recognition. LeMay quietly ensured that the court-martial threats disappeared, but there would be no public acknowledgement of the sergeant who'd violated regulations to save lives. Tommy didn't care. Recognition wouldn't bring Frankie back. Tommy flew 42 combat missions over Europe and survived the war without serious injury. His official record credited him with 9 confirmed kills and 6 probables, an exceptional tally for a waist gunner. The unofficial count was higher. Every bomber that came home because of the spar anchor modification represented kills Tommy had enabled. Every ball turret gunner who survived a rear undercut attack owed their life to the system he'd built. Tommy never talked about it. He returned to Brooklyn in November 1945, 25 years old, carrying Frankie's footlocker and a Purple Heart that had been awarded posthumously. He gave the medal to his parents. He didn't tell them about the spar anchor, didn't tell them about the 3 FW-190s he'd destroyed, didn't tell them about the underground modification campaign. He told them, Frankie died a hero. He saved his crew. He would have made you proud. Tommy went back to the Navy Yard and worked as a machinist for 37 years. He married, had 3 kids, lived a quiet life in the same neighborhood where he'd grown up. He never talked about the war, except once a year, on October 30th, when he'd take Frankie's Purple Heart to Greenwood Cemetery and sit by his brother's headstone. He'd tell Frankie about the spar anchor, about the lives saved, about the tactical shift it forced on the Luftwaffe, about the fact that the modification was still in use on Air Force gun systems into the 1960s. I kept my promise, Frankie, he'd say every year. I killed them, all of them, and I made sure they couldn't kill anyone else's little brother. Tommy Castellano died in 1989 at age 68. His obituary in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle mentioned his service as a B-17 gunner and his 40 years at the Navy Yard. It made no mention of the spar anchor, the 3 kills over Bremen, or the system that had saved thousands of lives. In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Sarah Chen was researching casualty rate changes in the 8th Air Force when she discovered the February 1944 engineering report. She traced the modification back to its source and found Tommy's name buried in LeMay's personal files. Dr. Chen tracked down Tommy's widow, Maria, and his surviving children. She told them what their husband and father had done. She showed them the statistics. An estimated 340 aircraft saved, over 1,800 lives preserved, because one sergeant had decided that regulations mattered less than keeping his promise to his dead brother. Maria Castellano cried when she heard the story. He never told me. 44 years married, and he never said a word. Dr. Chen's book, The Blood Debt, How One Sergeant Changed Air War, was published in 1997. It became required reading at the Air Force Academy. In 2001, the Air Force posthumously awarded Staff Sergeant Thomas Castellano the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military honor. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and technical innovation in aerial combat over Germany, December 18, 1943. Sergeant Castellano, motivated by the combat death of his brother, designed and installed an EIST, unauthorized defensive modification that saved thousands of American lives and fundamentally altered aerial combat doctrine. His actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service and personal sacrifice. The medal was presented to Tommy's eldest son, Frank, named after the uncle he'd never met. During the ceremony, a retired Air Force general read from Tommy's original letter to his father, the one he'd never sent. "I'm not going to watch more kids die waiting for some engineering team to maybe fix this in 18 months. I'm going to fix it myself." The general looked at the assembled crowd, pilots, gunners, historians, family members. Sergeant Castellano broke the rules. He violated regulations. He risked court-martial and military prison. He did this not for glory or recognition, but because he understood a fundamental truth. Sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to save the living. The spar anchor stands as a testament to the fact that the greatest innovations in warfare often come not from generals or engineers, but from the men close enough to the problem to understand its cost, and brave enough to fix it regardless of consequences. The story of Tommy Castellano and the spar anchor is not just a tale of technical innovation or combat heroics. It's a story about the moral calculus of war, about when rules should be broken, when authority should be defied, when the system's failure demands individual action. Frankie Castellano died because regulations mattered more than adaptation. He died because institutional change moved slower than German fighters. He died in a blind spot that everyone knew existed, but no one had the authority or the courage to fix. Tommy Castellano decided that his brother's death would not be meaningless. He couldn't bring Frankie back, but he could ensure that no other brother, no other son, would die the same way. The spar anchor saved 1,800 lives. But more importantly, it proved that the true heroes of any war are not the ones who follow orders perfectly. They're the ones who understand when orders are wrong and possess the moral clarity to act. Tommy never wanted recognition. He wanted his brother back. Since he couldn't have that, he settled for vengeance against the system that killed him. That vengeance took the form of 340 saved aircraft and 1,800 men who came home to their families. It's the best kind of revenge, the kind that creates life instead of taking it. If you found Tommy and Frankie Castellano's story compelling, please like this video to help us share it with more people. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories of World War II heroism and innovation. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what other wartime stories of brotherhood and sacrifice you'd like us to cover. These men deserve to be remembered. Thank you for keeping their memory alive.